Welcome back to the channel where I provide regular cricket content on interesting topics. Today's video is a rundown of who I believe to be the best 5 fielders in the history of Test cricket. Fielding for me is one of those underrated skills which often doesn't get the spotlight it deserves. But a good fielder can easily save 10 runs an innings, not to mention the added bonus of taking spectacular catches and runouts. With that in mind, I have racked the memory banks for a list of who I believe are the 5 best fielders of all time. Let's get started. Number 5, Paul Collingwood. Paul Collingwood is someone who very rarely gets talked about in cricketing discussions. In fact, this is the first time that I have mentioned him on the channel. This is a shame because he was a very fine player. In Test cricket he scored 4,200 runs at an average of over 40, but he is not here for his batting. Instead he is here for his excellent fielding ability. Collingwood is not a tall man, but he covered ground remarkably quickly, and was excellent fielding within the circle for England. He had an excellent arm and was involved in countless runouts. It was his catching, however, which sticks in the memory for me. He could get to balls which seemed impossible for others, and he took some spectacular grabs in his time. This resulted in him having a catch per game ratio of 1.41. Number 4, Herschel Gibbs. Gibbs was a player who seemed to be never too far away from controversy. His biggest scandal, of course, was his involvement in the match-fixing allegations, which rocked South African cricket in the early 2000s. One thing he could never have been criticised for, however, was his commitment in the field, something which Ricky Ponting singled out as being a factor in the Australians' batting tactics. Ponting highlighted Gibbs as the best overseas fielder he ever faced, mentioning that it was essentially impossible to take a quick single within the circle. One of the reasons for this was Gibbs' speed across the ground, and his bullseye ability to throw the stumps down. Gibbs was not short of his own athletic catches as well, ultimately resulting in him having a catch-to-game ratio of 1.04 catches a game. Number 3, Ricky Ponting. Speaking of Ponting, it would be a mistake for me to not include the great Aussie in this list. Ponting is often talked about for his batting and his captaincy, but one huge asset he brought to the Australian side was his fielding. Disgusting hygiene aside, I distinctly remember Ponting spitting in his hands before each and every delivery, to try and build up a tacky layer on his skin. He also walked in like someone who was desperate for the ball to come towards him, so he could pounce accordingly. This desire to always be involved in the game resulted in Ponting having the highest number of runouts attributed to his name than any other player in the history of cricket. The Aussie great was involved in a total of 80 runouts over the course of his one-day and Test playing career. If you add that to his spectacular catching with a record of 1.16 catches per Test matches, shows what an asset he was to the Australians in the field. Number 2, Suresh Raina. With probably the most unflattering Test statistics out of the bunch, Suresh Raina is the definition of what this list is all about. In 18 Test matches he averaged 26 with the bat and 46 with the ball. Those kind of figures aren't going to land him in any of my regular videos. But in the field he was dynamite, so he is a worthy addition at number 2 here. When Raina was fielding, it was really clear that he had some God-given instincts to anticipate where the ball would go next. Although this list is focused on Test cricket, it is good to use other statistics to highlight fielding ability. One which stands out for Raina is that no one in the history of the IPL has a higher catch-to-innings ratio than him. He averaged an incredible 0.53 catches per innings there. His abilities were recognized by being named the IPL's best catcher 2 years in a row. Raina's accomplishments on the field cannot be understated, and he will go down in history as one of the greatest cricket fielders of all time, even if his otherwise record is average. In Test cricket, the Indian averaged 1.27 catches a game, which is good also. Number 1, Jonty Rhodes. Believe it or not, on this channel I try not to be predictable and try to pick out some less known gems to give credit to. However, when it comes to fielding I would lose all credibility if I didn't bow down to the majestic Jonty Rhodes. Although I have mentioned all the players' fielding statistics, it is worth noting that catches per game can't always be an accurate measure. For example, a player who fielded at first slip all his career would always have a better catching ratio than someone in the covers. With that said, however, there is a stat relating to Jonty Rhodes which is staggering. Across one-day internationals and Test cricket, Rhodes averaged 1 run-out every 4 innings. This is compared to another great fielder, Ricky Ponting, who was around 1 every 8. The best ratio from India is Yuvraj Singh, who had a run-out closer to 1 every 10 innings. If you roll that up with the acrobatic catches and the stops in the field, you could argue that Rhodes was worth about 15 runs just from his fielding alone. His Test batting average is serviceable at 35, but if you include the benefits he made in the field, it is clear why he represented South Africa nearly 300 times. I can also confirm that in my memory he was the only fielder who I looked out for, and made me hope that the ball went in his direction. So for his unmatched achievements in the field and his ability to make what is quite a dull part of the game fun, Jonty Rhodes is a worthy number 1 in this collection. There were some players who just fell outside of this list who are worth mentioning. Ben Stokes is a fantastic fielder, as is Ravi Jadeja. Going a bit further back, Ian Botham was known to have buckets for hands, as was Jacques Kallis. Who am I missing then, everyone? What about some of the fielding stars from the 70s and 80s? There is a lean towards more modern-era players in this list, so feel free to correct me accordingly. As ever, thanks everyone for watching and participating.